Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and this is an episode of George Versus. On this episode, we're going to tackle the Attitude Era. Now, there's been a little bit of confusion on what George Versus is about. I'm going to reiterate what I thought I've said on the past few shows. Basically, it's my opinion on something that goes against the grain of what I think the normal opinion is out in the world. This week, we're going to take on the Attitude Era. And my reasoning for saying that the Attitude Era wasn't as great as you remember it. First off, terrible hardcore matches. Whether it be the Hardcore Championship 24/7 crap, or just any old random hardcore match. We had a lot of on the pole matches, a lot of man versus woman matches, a lot of just clusterfuck shit matches, trying to take what ECW was doing and bringing it into their show with the hardcore. However, trying to tone it down and make it more comedy, it didn't work. I mean, if you watch something back from the 90s, like say a Sandman versus Sabu match, you would see hardcore that works, that clicks. A team like the Dudley Boys that brought in the WWE a bit, they clicked, they made it work, they know how to structure it into the match. When you had guys like Hardcore Holly, Crash Holly, Al Snow, not bad wrestlers by any sense of the imagination, Steve Blackman, all good wrestlers, and I'm not just calling them guys out, these are the guys that come to mind as hardcore champions. They just really, their matches felt, I don't know, too much like comedy, too much goofiness, not enough hardcore. And the hardcore matches were just terrible, nowhere near on the par of what ECW was doing at the time. Next reason I think the Attitude Era wasn't as good as we remembered, the D-level jackass humor. Now, at the time of the Attitude Era, you gotta remember stuff like Jackass was becoming popular, stuff like South Park. Shows in general were becoming more and more edgier, where you got the kind of humor that was, anything was on the table kind of thing. People made fun of sexual orientation, people made fun of, toilet humor was very much in vogue. WWE tried to copy it, and they tried to bring the Jackass style of humor to their show with varying degrees of success. I mean, you had a group like Generation X that were constantly funny, but then you had other people that were boring and stupid. And just like we see now, a lot of times the humor of the WWE is very hit and miss, where it's, I mean, they're not comedy writers, these are not comedians, they're not comedic actors. Every once in a while you do find somebody funny, somebody like, for every Rock that you get, or every Generation X that you get a ton of other guys that try and fail, and they're just not funny. And that's what we had a lot in the Attitude Era, was a lot of unfunny skits that were supposed to be funny. And a lot of it happened, they cannibalized themselves. They would do one skit that was funny, and then they would do it over and over and over and over again. They would change up the participants and try it again. Stuff like Beaver Cleavage. That whole thing was a new way to introduce Mosh back into wrestling. Not funny at all. Nobody cared. They dropped the gimmick within a week. I mean, to me, you leave the comedy and you leave it to the professionals, or you let guys that know how to work comedic styles work in. Another big reason why the Attitude Era wasn't as good as you remember, the storylines were in the era. 9 times out of 10, the payoff for a storyline was terrible. Think Vince McMahon as the higher power. Think ones that are downright abandoned, like GTV, which we still don't know who was. Rikishi running over Stone Cold. I mean, a lot of it didn't make sense. A lot of it was very nonsensical, very dumb, very I don't know. There were swerves and turns that just didn't need to be. I mean, you had guys like Triple H turning on DX when they didn't have to. You had guys, you had Vince McMahon being part of the corporate ministry who started off by kidnapping his daughter. I mean, you had all this stupid, weird stuff. The Triple H Stephanie marriage where he kidnapped her, but then they fell in love afterwards. Just mind-bogglingly stupid and weird storylines that kind of get washed over by the good that was happening on the show. There was a lot of good that happened in the Attitude Era. There's no denying that. The evolution of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Kane, the New Age Outlaws, Degeneration X. The Undertaker did some of his best work during the time. Mick Foley becoming a megastar. All this was good, but for everything good, it was outbalanced by the bad as well. Now, another thing that I didn't like was the extinction of the jobbers and the managers. Now, the jobbers was kind of predicated by WCW Nitro. In the Monday Night War, going back and forth, they had to fight each other, so they couldn't put on a match where it was Barry Horowitz versus Steve Austin. And that was what predicated it. However, what it did when you eliminate the jobber matches is you got to see Steve Austin versus The Rock on free TV. Or you got to see Owen Hart versus Triple H on free TV. So why do you buy the pay-per-view if you see this match already? It kind of destroyed the old way of building a match and building the specialness of a match. Think of something like John Cena and Randy Orton today if you weren't around in the Attitude Era, and think of how many times they actually wrestled. And then you could go back in the Attitude Era and you could see matches like Austin and Rock wrestling either tag team matches or single matches. They wrestled several times. Undertaker and Foley wrestled all the time against each other. Owen Hart and Steve Austin wrestled all the time against each other. I mean, it takes away the specialness of a first-time match, much like Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan or John Cena versus The Rock #1. I don't care what you think of those matches. They were special because it was the first time you see them. And also, they pretty much killed away the managers. We're starting to see managers come back, but you got away from it during this time frame. I mean, it was something that helped the characters or the wrestlers that didn't talk as well. I mean, look at Bobby the Brain Heenan. He elevated everybody that ever was with him. Jimmy Hart was the same way. Classy Freddie Blassie. I mean, J.J. Dillon. Gary Hart. I mean, if you look down the history of wrestling to some of your greatest wrestlers ever, at one point or another, they had one of these managers. Hulk Hogan was managed by Freddie Blassie. Andre the Giant was managed by Bobby the Brain Heenan. Gary Hart and all the guys he managed in Texas, like Kamala, Gino Hernandez. I mean, the list goes on and on. The Great Muta, Terry Funk, J.J. Dillon with the Four Horsemen. The manager, to me, added such a dichotomy to a team or a stable or even a singles wrestler. I still don't understand why they got rid of it other than the payroll aspect maybe. And they kind of went away with it and started using more and more valets, which leads us into our next segment. During the Attitude Era, there was rampant misogyny and racism. It's a blatant fact. Go back and watch it. I mean, you may not have noticed at the time frame, but all the women were running around in swimsuits, were getting naked. Not that I have anything at all wrong with it. I enjoy looking at a naked woman just as much as any other straight man in America. However, it's not really a good story to sell. I mean, you had girls being kidnapped like Stephanie McMahon. You had girls being abused like Sable, Mark Mero, which they kind of hinted at. You had girls that were out there for nothing other than to show their tits, like Stephanie the Cat, or Stacy the Cat Carter, or one of the several other that they would bring in during the time. You tie that in the way the women were treated, along with the racism. I mean, you had groups like Nation of Domination, which was basically your Nation of Islam in WWE. You had Los Boricuas, which were a Spanish thug group. Even the Disciples of Apocalypse were a racist biker gang. I mean, the whole era just had, it was too much cartoons of what was happening in real life, too much, I mean, a lot of it was right out in front racism, and a lot of it was right out in front misogyny, and to me, getting past that era and looking back, it's something that I can't understand that's ever flown or ever was allowed to go on the television. Coming off of that, my last point, and probably my best point, I saved the best for last. The main reason why the Attitude Era wasn't as good as you remember it was the devaluation of all of the belts. Up until the Attitude Era, you had 3, sometimes 4 major world championships in WWE. You had the world title, the tag title, the intercontinental title. At times they'd have a light heavyweight title, or they'd have the women's title, which was retired, brought back, all that stuff. Everything up to that era, it was important to be a world champion. It was almost important to be a tag champion, and it was just important to be a tag champion as it was an intercontinental champion. They were all major accomplishments. Think about that. Now fast forward to this generation, and it started with the Attitude Era. You can't name, without looking it up on Google, the last 10 Intercontinental Champions. You can't name the last 10 Tag Team Champions. If you can, you either got a photogenic memory, or you're lying and you're looking it up on Google, or you're looking up in Wikipedia, or wherever, or on the WWE's website. Heck, I'd say it's even hard to name in order the last 10 World Heavyweight Champions. And that started with the Attitude Era. We had, famously, Vince Russo said that belts are just props. And that's what they were used as. You had new belts coming in, the European Championship, which came in with a lot of prestige, and they did well with it for a while. But then it just became, you know, these belts were traded back and forth. The Hardcore Championship, the European Championship, the Tag Team Championship. Mick Foley has 3 world title runs that all amount to a month. I mean, think about that. CM Punk just came off of a 400 and something day world title run about a year ago. And Mick Foley, one of the great wrestlers in history, has 3 runs that equal up less than a month. The Rock had runs that were short. Triple H had short runs. They threw the Intercontinental title on basically anybody they felt like giving it for a week or two. The tag title, I don't even know. I can't even remember or fathom half of the thrown together crap tag teams that got it. At one point, the tag titles went from Stone Cold and Shawn Michaels to Stone Cold and Dude Love. I mean, and don't even get me started on the Hardcore title, which would change hands 5 to 10 times in a show. They really devalued it. They made the belt secondary to everything else, and it's still hurting to this day. To this day now, an Intercontinental Champion is someone that's barely booked. Used to be, if you think about it in the history, in the annals of time, you got the Intercontinental Champion, that means that they're looking at you as someone that could potentially be a world champion. Guys like Tito Santana, guys like Randy Macho Man Savage, guys like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Ultimate Warrior. I mean, you had these guys that were potentially going to be your next big stars. And even into the 90s, you had guys like Razor Ramon, you had guys like Shawn Michaels himself. You had all these guys winning the Intercontinental title, and it was a big, prestigious deal. Then we get into the Attitude Era, and you got guys that have no business winning it just to keep it for a week, or keep it for 2 weeks, just to make an interesting storyline on TV. Tag titles just as bad. The tag titles, I think, took a lot bigger hit because people didn't like tag wrestling in the back. But They really shouldn't have, because it should have stayed with the value of the three. Should have said the world title's the most valuable, tag titles and intercontinental are right there up to it. If you win one of these, you're on your path to become a world champion, which should ultimately be the number one storyline in the company, somebody wanting to become world champion. And we all complain about it now, how the belts have no prestige, how no one cares. This is when it started, this is how it began. But basically that's my opinion on it. These are the reasons I think that the Attitude Era isn't as good as everybody remembers it. We all look at it with rose-colored glasses. Like I said, there's a lot of great stuff that came out of it, but it was just as much bad as there was good. Overall, as an era, it's probably not as good as the Rock and Wrestling era, a little bit better than the New Generation. The Ruthless Aggression era, I actually think, personally, in my opinion, was a better era. Now, the Cena era that we're in now is starting to get back to what they were with the Hogan Rock and Wrestling era, but not quite there yet. So overall, a middle-of-the-run era, more remembered for its shock value, more remembered for its sound bites and its little errors, little snippets. But basically, not as good as we all remember it or like to remember it. But that's all I have to say about this. My name is George Coles, and this has been another George Versus.